If you ever find yourself in this situation, don't do what she did. In 2006, a group of cave divers decided they wanted to film a documentary in one of the most dangerous caves in the world. But only a few hours into their descent, and a freak storm erupts on land, collapsing the entrance to the cave. In order to avoid the huge falling rocks that were coming off the ceiling, they were forced to swim through one of the uncharted sections of the cave. After they've been diving for over an hour, they luckily come across this island in the middle of a tunnel, where they set up camp and wait to be rescued. After 48 hours and no sign of a rescue, the cameraman actually starts filming in case they don't make it out of there. At the same time, one of their crew members does something very stupid. This is why you should never talk to strangers. In the early 2000s, a young girl was waiting outside her friend's house peeling the bark off of a tree when a strange man approaches her. As he got closer, she could see that he was grinning ear to ear and his face was white as a ghost. He walks right up to her and pinches her on the arm and says, "How would you like it if I peeled your skin off?" Just then, her friend's mom yells for her to come inside and the man walks away. It would be years before the girl's mother would finally tell her who this man really was. Her friend's mom had seen the man pinch her on the arm and had immediately called the police, who quickly rounded this guy up. Plastered all across the inside of his van were dozens of pictures of this girl. But what they found in his storage locker is straight out of a nightmare. In the locker was a chair with hand and arm restraints. Next to it was an anatomy book and hundreds of torture tools. This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, "Well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open." She's like, "I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either." Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house. And so he jokingly asks her, "You ever see any ghosts walking around your attic?" Her face got completely serious, and she's like, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening. So we investigated and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years. This is why you should always sprint up your stairs at night. In 2018, a boy was up late gaming in his basement when he decided to go to bed. The basement's only light was controlled by a pull chain at the foot of the stairs, which meant after he pulled it, he'd be downstairs in darkness, so he would sprint up the stairs. Because everybody knows if you're not fast enough, this guy'll get you. So he did just that, and he made it upstairs safely when he realized he had forgotten his phone in the basement. So he took a deep breath and headed right back down. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, "Was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed?" He responded, "Yes, one time. I was in the woods and a couple walked through and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me." That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. This is why you should always watch videos to the end. In 2003, a woman came home to her apartment to see that her door was unlocked. She went inside, nothing was missing, so she assumed she must have left it open. When it happened a few more times, but still nothing was missing in her apartment, she went out and got a camera, set it up in her apartment aimed at the front door. The next day, her door was unlocked, so she reviewed the footage. She watches in horror as late in the night, her front door opens and in walks this tall, creepy man who looks around and then walks towards her bedroom off camera. She immediately sprints out of her apartment and calls the police, who show up and tell her to go back in her apartment and just try to stay calm, and that they would put an officer right outside her door so she's safe. As she's sitting on the bed, totally traumatized, she realizes something. She only saw him enter her apartment on that video. She doesn't know if he actually left. As she's sitting there, she feels breathing on her ankles. She runs out, the cop comes in, and he finds the tall, creepy man under the bed holding a knife and a camera. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. This is why you should never go camping alone. In 2014, a man decided to make the multi-day hike out to a cabin in the woods where his friends were staying for the weekend. As the sun began to set on the first day of his journey, he found a clearing in the woods, set up his tent, and crawled inside. As he lay there, he started to hear what sounded like something moving around the edge of the clearing. At first, he didn't think much of it until he noticed that whatever it was circling the clearing over and over and over again. Right as he's starting to feel really uneasy, the noise just stops, and he eventually falls asleep. But a couple hours later, he wakes up to the sound of the zipper on his tent slowly opening. Before he has time to react, the head of a man who has no eyes in his eye sockets comes inside his tent and just says, "I never asked for much," before pulling his head out and walking away. Turns out the hiker had just encountered Raymond Robinson, aka the Green Man, who was the focus of an urban legend about a faceless man that stalked people in the woods in Pennsylvania. Well, turned out it was true. This is why you always say yes to tandoori chicken. In 2012, a high school tutor and her student stayed up so late one night studying that by the time they were done, the buses had stopped running. Without another way home, the student asked if he could stay the night at her place. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they got back to the apartment, she fell asleep on her bed and he fell asleep on a blanket next to her bed on the ground. A few hours later, she wakes up to the boy standing awkwardly in the middle of the room with a very strange look on his face. She asks him, "What's wrong?" He looks at her and says, "I'm really hungry. Let's go get some tandoori chicken." Confused, she says, "It's 2 a.m. Just get a snack in the cupboard." And he grabs her by the arm and he says, "No, we are getting tandoori chicken right now." And he yanks her from the bed. Feeling totally caught off guard by this whole situation, she goes into the hall with the boy, and as soon as the door shuts behind them, she can tell that he is terrified. He looks at her and just says, "I'm not actually hungry. When I woke up, there was someone under your bed." This is why you might not want to eat deer meat. In late 2019, a man and his grandfather were out hunting when they spotted something way off in the distance that just didn't seem right. A deer was howling and then lowering its antlers and charging forward like a battering ram as if it was fighting with another animal. But when they crept closer, they could tell that the deer was all alone and something was definitely wrong with it. The deer was repeatedly ramming its head into a tree, and then finally one of its antlers breaks off and it kneels down and starts chewing on the antler. As they're watching in horror, the deer in a sudden lurching movement gets up on its hind legs and then walks like a human into the nearby lake, goes under, and does not resurface. Turns out the deer had chronic wasting disease, which is a new, highly contagious neurological disorder that drills holes in the brains of those affected and leads to a distinct lack of fear and awareness and is always fatal. And now, scientists are concerned it might spread to humans in 2020. Yes, the picture at the end is real. In 1876, a woman from a very prominent family in Paris goes missing. After years go by and no one has a clue what happened to this woman, friends and family ultimately mourn her death and move on. 25 years later, and this anonymous letter shows up on the Attorney General's desk, claiming that the missing woman's family had a secret. Intrigued by the letter, the police go to the family's home, show it to them, and ask to search the property, to which they say, "Go for it." They search, they don't find anything, but on the way out, they notice something very peculiar. At the end of some stairs was a door that was padlocked shut. When the family refused to open it, the police break it down and make a horrifying discovery. Cowering on a rotten straw mattress in a pitch black room was the missing woman, now 50 years old and extremely malnourished. Her mother had imprisoned her there after they had fought over her boyfriend, and she had not seen sunlight or another human being in 25 years. This is why you should always watch what you say in public. In the late 1970s, a man began breaking into homes in order to assault the families inside of them. After dozens of attacks and no suspects in custody, the citizens were totally on edge, so the police decide to host this town hall meeting so they can discuss the situation out in public. During the meeting, a local man stands up and says, "I would totally kick that guy's ass if he came anywhere near my wife." Then, in a crazy, ironic turn of events, that angry man and his wife become the next victims. Following their assault, the attacker completely changes his behavior. He goes from kind of petty home invader to full-blown serial killer, targeting only married men and their wives. When decades later, police finally identify Joseph D'Angelo as the killer, as they're going through old photos from the case, they make a startling discovery about his motives. D'Angelo had attended that town hall meeting.